Hello students, welcome to today's English class. As you know, I am Roopna Ravindran, Assistant Professor of English, Government Degree College, Chevala. So today I am going to read the short story, The Kite Maker, written by Ruskin Bond. So before going to the story, I'll give you an introduction about the author and I'll give you a short introduction about the story as well. And then let us read the story. So this is just the part 1 of the video Kite Maker. Okay, so this video will have just the reading of the story. I don't think you need a paraphrase for the story because it is self-explanatory. You can keep the textbook with you. Otherwise, if you are comfortable listening to this video, you can just listen to the video. And you can go to the part 2 of this series. In part 2, you will have the summary and comprehension questions explained. So these comprehension questions are taken from your textbook, English in Use, prescribed by Osmania University. So here you have the picture of the author, Ruskin Bond. As you know, Ruskin Bond is one of the most loved writers of our country. I'm sure all of you might be very familiar with his name, Ruskin Bond. His writings are well read by children. He was born on 19th May 1934. He is an Indian author of British descent. He lives in Missouri, India. Most of his writings are influenced by his life at the foothills of Himalayas. He started writing at an early age. I think when he was 17 years old, and it was the time when he actually stepped out of his school. He had written over 500 short stories and novels. Many of his writings belong to children and they are called children's literature. Some of the story collections are for adults also, and you can find a few poetry and memoirs too. He started writing for children at the age of 40, and the first book that he wrote for children is Angry River. His books are available as audiobooks also. He received the Padma Shri in 1999 and Padma Bhushan in 2014 for his valuable contributions in literature. So most of his writings are about his Anglo-Indian experiences. We can also find the kind of changing political, social and cultural aspects of India represented in his writings. He is quite old and he has been through the colonial, post-colonial and post-independence India. So all these are reflected in his writings. His autobiographical work is Rain in the Mountains, and other notable writings are The Blue Umbrella, Delhi is Not Far, The Night Train at Deoli, A Flight of Pigeons, Our Trees Still Grow in Dera, The Cherry Tree, and so on. Ruskin Bond loves children and he encourages young writers to write in his simple style of writing. He don't want to bombard the readers with big words, vocabulary and all. So he asks the children or the young writers to use simple language to write. We can call him an iconic writer with a career spanning over 6 decades. In his writing, you can find the life of solitude because his childhood was particularly lonely because of some bad experiences that he had. Then you can find the beautiful natural surroundings at the foothills of Himalayas. You can also find hills and mountains remarkably present in majority of his writing. So these things give the readers, the young readers, a kind of soothing effect, and many of his writings were adapted to film. Some of them to mention are The Blue Umbrella, A Flight of Pigeons and Susanna's 7 Husbands. So moving on to the story. This story, Kite Maker, is about an expert kite maker. His name is Mahmood, and he is very much in his own world. He has a grandson, Ali, who loves flying kites, but he doesn't know how to fly kites properly. So Mahmood recollects about his young days, a day when everyone used to love flying kites. So it is through his reminiscences, his recollection of a bygone era, that we come to know about olden days when even the Nawabs, the kings, used to love kite making, and these kite makers had the patron for, they received patron for making kites. So this person, that is Mahmood, made beautiful kites and rare kites, and it was just a mesmeristic view that you could see in the open space. So let us read this story, The Kite Maker, written by Ruskin Bond. There was but one tree in the street known as Gali Ramnath, ancient banyan tree that had grown through the cracks of an abandoned mosque. And little Ali's kite had caught in its branches. The boy, barefoot and clad only in a torn shirt, ran along the cobblestones of the narrow street to where his grandfather sat, nodding dreamily in the sunshine of their back courtyard. "Grandfather," shouted the boy, "my kite has gone." The old man woke from his daydream with a start, and raising his head, displayed a beard that would have been white had it not been dyed red with mehndi leaves. "Did the twine break?" he asked. "I know that. Kite twine is not what it used to be." "No, grandfather, the kite is stuck in the banyan tree." The old man chuckled. He laughed. "You have yet to learn how to fly a kite properly, my child. And I am too old to teach you. That is the pity of it, but you shall have another." He had just finished making a new kite from bamboo paper and thin silk, and it lay in the sun firming up. It was a pale pink kite with a small green tail. The old man handed it to Ali, and the boy raised himself on his toes and kissed his grandfather's hollowed out cheek. "I will not lose this one," he said. "This kite will fly like a bird." And he turned on his heels and skipped out of the courtyard. The old man remained dreaming in the sun. His kite shop was gone, the premises long since sold to a junk dealer, but he still made kites for his own amusement and for the benefit of his grandson Ali. Not many people bought kites these days. Adults disdained them, and children preferred to spend their money at the cinema. Moreover, there were not many open spaces left for the flying of kites. The city had swallowed up the open grassland that had stretched from the old fort's walls to the river bank. But the old man remembered a time when grown men flew kites and great battles were fought. The kites swerving and swooping in the sky, tangling with each other until the strings of one was severed. Then the defeated but liberated kite would float away into the blue unknown. There was a good deal of betting and money frequently changing hands. Kite flying was then the sport of kings. And the old man remembered how the Nawab himself would come down to the riverside with his retinue to participate in his noble pastime. There was a time then to spend an idle hour with a gay, dancing strip of paper. Now everyone hurried in a heat of hope, and delicate things like kites and daydreams were trampled underfoot. He, Mahmood the kite maker, had in the prime of his life been well known throughout the city. Some of his more elaborate kites once sold for as much as 3 or 4 rupees each. At the request of the Nawab, he had once made a very special kind of kite, unlike any that had been seen in the district. It consisted of a series of small, very light paper discs trailing on a thin bamboo frame. To the end of each disc, he fixed a sprig of grass, forming a balance on both sides. The surface of the foremost disc was slightly convex, and a fantastic face was painted on it, having 2 eyes made of small mirrors. The disc, decreasing in size from head to tail, assumed an undulatory form and gave the kite the appearance of a crawling serpent. It required great skill to raise this cumbersome device from the ground, and only Mahmud could manage it. Everyone had heard of the dragon kite that Mahmud had built, and word went around that it possessed supernatural powers. A large crowd assembled in the open to watch its first public launching in the presence of Nawab. At the first attempt, it refused to leave the ground. The disc made a plaintive protesting sound, and the sun was trapped in the little mirrors, making of the kite a living, complaining creature. Then the wind came from the right direction, and the dragon kite soared into the sky, wriggling its way higher and higher, the sun still glinting in its devil eyes. And when it went very high, it pulled fiercely on the twine, and Mahmud's young sons had to help him with the reel. Still the kite pulled, determined to be free, to break loose, to live a life of its own, and eventually it did so. The twine snapped, the kite leaped away toward the sun, sailing on heavenward until it was lost to view. It was never found again, and Mahmud wondered afterwards if he made too vivid, too living a thing of a great kite. He did not make another like it. Instead, he presented to the Nawab a musical kite, one that made a sound like a violin when it rose in the air. Those were more leisurely, more spacious days, but the Nawab had died years ago, and his descendants were almost as poor as Mahmud himself. Kite makers, like poets, once had their patrons, but no one knew Mahmud, simply because there were too many people in the gully and they could not be bothered with their neighbors. When Mahmud was younger and had fallen sick, everyone in the neighborhood had come to ask after his health. But now, when his days were drawing to a close, no one visited him. Most of his old friends were dead, and his sons had grown up. One was working in a local garage, and the other, who was in Pakistan at the time of partition, had not been able to rejoin his relatives. The children who had bought kites from him 10 years ago were now grown men struggling for a living. They did not have time for the old man and his memories. They had grown up in a swiftly changing and competitive world, and they looked at the old kite maker and the banyan tree with the same indifference. Both were taken for granted, permanent fixtures that were of no concern to the raucous, sweating mass of humanity that surrounded them. No longer did people gather under the banyan tree to discuss their problems and their plans. Only in the summer months did a few seek shelter from the fierce sun. But there was the boy, his grandson. It was good that Mahmud's son worked close by, for it gladdened the old man's heart to watch the small boy at play in the winter sunshine, growing under his eyes like a young and well-nourished sapling, putting forth new leaves each day. There is a great affinity between trees and men. We grow at much the same pace, if we are not hurt or starved or cut down. In our youth, we are resplendent creatures, beautiful creatures, and in our declining years, we stoop a little. We remember, we stretch our brittle limbs in the sun, and then, with a sigh, we shed our last leaves. Mahmud was like the banyan tree, his hands gnarled and twisted like the roots of the ancient tree. Ali was like the young mimosa planted at the end of the courtyard. In 2 years, both he and the tree would acquire the strength and confidence of their early youth. The voices in the street grew fainter, and Mahmud wondered if he was going to fall asleep and dream, as he often did, of a kite so beautiful and powerful that it would resemble the great white bird of the Hindus, Garuda, God Vishnu's famous steed. He would like to make a wonderful new kite for little Ali. He had nothing else to leave the boy. He heard Ali's voice in the distance, but did not realize that the boy was calling him. The voice seemed to come from very far away. Ali was at the courtyard door, asking if his mother had as yet returned from the bazaar. When Mahmud did not answer, the boy came forward, repeating his question. The sunlight was slanting across the old man's head, and a small white butterfly rested on his flowing beard. Mahmud was silent, and when Ali put his small brown hand on the old man's shoulder, he met with no response. The boy heard a faint sound like the rubbing of marbles in his pocket. Suddenly, afraid, Ali turned and moved to the door and then ran down the street shouting for his mother. The butterfly left the old man's beard and flew to the mimosa tree, and a sudden gust of wind caught the torn kite and lifted it in the air, carrying it far above the struggling city into the blind blue sky. So that is the story, The Kite Maker. Hope you enjoyed listening to the story. You can go to the second video, part 2 of The Kite Maker, where I'll give you a short summary and explanation of comprehension 2 questions given in your textbook. That is all for now. Thank you, students, for listening.